The road stretched into the darkness, lit only by headlights, as the car made its way from Santo Domingo to Casablanca Beach, in the province of Esmeraldas. Inside were three young women, Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia. They had planned to spend a few days by the sea, but the trip no longer felt carefree as the night grew heavy with silence. At 11:06 in the evening, Dennis sent a message to a friend. "I have a bad feeling." She hit send and stared at the screen, waiting for a reply, but the message's status simply read, "Delivered." The friend would later say that, at the time, she didn't realize how serious the tone of the message was. Around the same time, Nayeli turned on her phone's location sharing and sent the coordinates to her sister. On the map, she watched the pin move along the highway until the car turned off the main road and onto a dirt road. A few minutes later, the signal disappeared. A tense silence filled the car as Juliana tried to call her friends, but the calls wouldn't go through, the service was dropping, and the phones had no signal. And outside, there was no sign of any nearby city lights. The last activity on their devices was recorded around 11:15 in the evening. After that, no more messages, no calls, no location updates. The car had vanished from the highway, and with it, all communication was cut off. This night marked the beginning of a story that would go down as one of the most horrific crimes in Ecuador's modern history. Before the tragedy in Esmeraldas, the three friends from Santo Domingo lived ordinary lives, full of hope. Their bond was built on years of strong friendship, shared dreams, and a firm belief that their best days were still ahead. 21-year-old Juliana Macias had graduated from the Sachila Institute with a degree in transportation engineering. She excelled in her studies, was the top graduate in her class, and had earned the deep respect of her professors. Juliana was known for her responsibility and strong work ethic. Outside of her studies, she pursued music under the stage name Syria. She took voice lessons, performed at local venues, and shared her songs on social media. Determined to build a singing career on her own, without the help of producers, 19-year-old Denis Reyna dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Having cared for stray animals since childhood, her dream was to open her own clinic to help those who cannot express their pain with words. Shortly before the tragedy, she was planning to move to the US, to finish her education and start a new life near her friend. Those close to her remembered her as calm, reserved, and dependable. 22-year-old Nayeli Tapia was raising a 4-year-old daughter. After a period of searching for stable work in Quito, she began a modeling career, participating in photo shoots and considering a move to Spain. Her main goal was to provide a secure future for her child. She combined perseverance and kindness, qualities that helped her overcome life's challenges. Despite the distance and their busy schedules, Juliana, Dennis, and Nayeli always stayed in touch. They messaged each other almost every day, sharing news, life updates, and making plans for the future. They were united by a shared belief that success is achieved through hard work and mutual support. It was this belief that made them inseparable, until their final trip together in early April of 2023 in Santo Domingo. Denis Reyna met up with Luis Fernando Vaca, a man she had known for several years. During their meeting, Vaca suggested a short trip to the coast, specifically to the province of Esmeraldas, with a stop in the tourist resort area of Casablanca. He explained it would just be a simple road trip for a few days and invited Denise to bring her friends along. Denise didn't agree on the spot. She told him she needed to discuss it with Juliana Macias and Nayeli Tapia to figure out the dates, the length of the trip, where they would stay, and who else would be going. She made it clear that she wouldn't make a decision without talking it over with her friends. Vaca assured her that it would be simple, a daytime drive, relaxing on the beach, and coming back on schedule. No strings attached. After the meeting, Denise got in touch with Juliana and Nayeli. She pitched the idea of going to Casablanca for a short getaway, staying in the hotel area and, overall, just keeping it casual. She mentioned that some of Vaca's acquaintances would be joining them, and stressed that the trip was nothing more than a beach outing. No tight schedule, nothing fancy. Juliana said she could go for a few days. Nayeli, for her part, started working out the logistics, including finding someone to look after her child while she was away. Denise then told her family about the plan. She said there was an offer to spend a few days at the beach, and that it would be a quick trip there and back. She mentioned that nothing was final yet. She needed her friends to be fully on board and to iron out some of the details. She mentioned Casablanca as the destination, a well-known resort area in Esmeraldas that people usually drive to from Santo Domingo. The three friends talked about the trip constantly: what to pack, where and who to meet, and how it would all go down. There were no red flags, the route was a familiar one, and the whole idea sounded like a standard weekend getaway. In the end, they all agreed. They were in. Denis let Vaca know that she wouldn't be going alone, that Juliana and Nayeli were coming with her, and confirmed that they were ready to leave soon. At that point, everyone involved was on the same page about what kind of trip this was supposed to be. There were no strange requests in their texts or conversations, no changes to the route, or anything that might have seemed out of the ordinary. The date was set. The first week of April. The decision was made, and the trip was confirmed. That morning, on April 4th, Denis Reyna left her house in Santo Domingo. Later that day, she was joined by Nayeli Tapia, who had traveled from Quito to spend time with her close friends. After running a few errands during the day, the friends went back to Denis's house. Their plan for the evening was set. They were heading to the coast. That night, a black Chevrolet Sail pulled up to the house, and Luis Fernando Vaca was behind the wheel. Denis and Nayeli got in the car, and then they went to pick up Juliana Macias. With that, the group was all together. At the same time, another car was heading in the same direction, carrying Andres Sombrano and Omar Ardenius. Their departure coincided with the young women's group, and at several points on the highway, both cars were seen driving close to each other, maintaining visual contact on certain stretches of the road. The route from Santo Domingo to Casablanca was well known and straightforward, a federal highway leading out of the city, which then turned into a coastal road. Under normal conditions, the trip would take about 4 hours without any long stops. Fuel level was checked, the phones were charged, and cell service was available. Luis Fernando Vaca remained behind the wheel of the Chevrolet Sail. At the time of departure, there were no issues with the car or its paperwork. On the morning of April 5th, the families of Denis, Juliana, and Nayeli stopped receiving replies. Messages in their chat apps remained unread, and phone calls wouldn't go through. Instead of the short "we made it" text from Casablanca, there was only silence in the chats. By noon on April 5th, each family began their own search for answers. They started calling friends, who the young women had spoken to the night before, trying to piece together when they had left Santo Domingo and if they had made any known stops, but no one had heard from them since late the previous evening. Call logs only showed multiple failed attempts to reach them. Nayeli's sister checked the geolocation feature on her phone and saw that the last signal had come in late on the evening of April 4th, and then nothing. No updates, no movement. This was the first alarming sign, indicating that something had gone seriously wrong. The families exchanged screenshots of the geolocation data and began to save every detail. By the evening of April 5th, they had joined forces. They created a timeline of the young women's last known contacts, mapped out their intended route, and gathered detailed descriptions of their appearance, clothing, and the phones they were using. Together, they decided to report them missing to the police, and simultaneously began spreading the word on social media. On the morning of April 6th, attorney Paulina Rueda, Juliana's aunt, officially filed a missing persons report with the National Police. The report listed the young women's names, their ages, their city of departure, Santo Domingo, and their intended route to the coast. The time of last contact and emergency contact information for the families were also included. The case was classified as urgent. As soon as the report was filed, the search began. Police sent out alerts to posts along the route, checked hospitals and urgent care centers, and notified checkpoints on major roads leading towards Esmeraldas. The families were asked to immediately report any new information and to save all message histories. At the same time, a public search effort got underway. Relatives and friends created social media posts with photos of Denis, Juliana, and Nayeli, listing their last known location and contact numbers. These posts spread quickly through Santo Domingo's public forums and groups dedicated to the Esmeraldas coast. Volunteers joined the search, offering to help monitor incoming messages and organize information. By noon on April 6th, the families had gathered key details: the girls' last confirmed activities, the moment Nayeli's geolocation stopped updating, and the multiple failed attempts to contact them. There was still no contact, and all the collected data was handed over to the lead investigator. Both sides agreed to continue sharing information as it came in. By the evening of April 6th, the uncertainty remained. There were no police reports along the highway, nor any medical records that could be definitively linked to the missing women. Communication channels remained open, and the group chats were active. Everyone understood that the next day, any sign could be a breakthrough. On the afternoon of April 7, fishermen near the Esmeraldas River in the Quininde area noticed a dog that was persistently digging in the dirt at the edge of some brush. When they checked the spot, they discovered a partially buried body. The police arrived, cordoned off the area, and began to excavate. A short distance from the first location, 2 more bodies were found. All 3 victims were women, and their clothing indicated that they had likely been at the beach. Light outfits, beachwear, all 3 had their hands bound and mouths taped shut. A preliminary external examination revealed numerous injuries indicating prolonged violence, bruises, abrasions, and rope marks. Each had deep cuts to her neck, likely inflicted by a machete or another heavy chopping tool. The soft tissues of their faces were severely damaged. The bodies were taken to the morgue for forensic examination and identification. The families were officially notified of the tragedy. Identification was carried out based on a combination of features: build, clothing items, tattoos, and other distinguishing marks. The extent of the injuries complicated the process, especially in one case. Relatives noted that the face was severely disfigured, so they relied on physical features below the head. The forensic examination showed that all 3 victims had suffered a combination of incised and stab wounds, head and limb injuries, and also showed signs of being held captive for a prolonged period. The official cause of death for each was deep neck wounds resulting in massive blood loss. One of the victims, Denis Reyna, had a deep cut on her palm and a severe blow to her forearm. These were classified as defensive wounds. Juliana Macias was found to have multiple contusions on her face and chest, including a blunt force trauma injury. Nayeli Tapia had sustained mixed trauma to her torso and limbs, as well as signs of severe compression on her wrists. Based on the physical evidence and personal identifiers, the victims were officially identified as Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia. The expert's report included a detailed description of the injuries, the estimated time of death, and a list of the biological samples collected for comparative analysis. Investigators also documented the condition of the clothing and restraints, as well as microparticles found on the skin and fabric. After the initial forensic procedures were completed, all materials were handed over to the lead investigator in accordance with standard legal protocols. The families were notified of the identification results and informed of the next steps. At this stage of the investigation, a starting point emerged: the confirmed location where the bodies were found, the established identities of the victims, and objective forensic data pointing to a violent crime. A key lead in the investigation became the geolocation data that Nayeli Tapia had shared with her sister. On the night of her disappearance, investigators seized the phone and accessed its geolocation log. The data showed movement late on the evening of April 4th, after which the signal abruptly cut out. The last recorded location matched the area where the bodies were discovered on April 7th near the Esmeraldas River. By comparing timestamps and the last known attempts to make contact, authorities determined that the geolocation updates stopped shortly after the car turned off the main highway leading to the coast. Investigators then focused on footage from traffic surveillance cameras on the roads connecting Santo Domingo with rural communities on the outskirts of the tourist region. Security cameras on private homes and small businesses captured a convoy of 2 cars, a black Chevrolet Sail and another vehicle, driving close together. In several frames, the black Chevrolet was clearly visible. Its make, color, and body type perfectly matched the details from a known car rental agency. An inquiry sent to the rental company confirmed that this Chevrolet Sail had been rented a few days before the trip under the name Olger Sombrano, with the pickup and return dates matching the suspected timeline of events. Further investigation confirmed that on April 4th, Luis Fernando Vaca was driving the car. This was corroborated by both witness statements and a visual comparison of the driver in the footage with Vaca's known appearance. The car's route was mapped against the supposed path to Casablanca. Surveillance footage showed that the convoy turned off the main highway at an intersection, heading into a more remote area and eventually turning onto a dirt road. Around this same time, Nayeli's geolocation tracking stopped. This was a key moment, indicating that the group was not heading to the resort area, but to an isolated location that was later linked to the river where the bodies were found. A few days after the discovery of the bodies, the black Chevrolet Sail was found in Santo Domingo with damage consistent with a recent collision. A forensic analysis, using luminol and rapid blood tests, revealed traces of biological fluids in both the cabin and the trunk. Additionally, investigators found a fingernail fragment wedged between a plastic panel and the dashboard seal. The fragment, based on its physical characteristics, was preliminarily linked to Denis Reyna. All biological samples, including swabs, tissue particles, and the fingernail fragment, were collected and properly logged. The analysis led investigators to several critical conclusions: the absence of blood at the riverbank, the presence of biological evidence inside the car, and the correlation between the last geolocation signal and the point where the cars turned off the main road. Taken together, this evidence strongly suggested that the violent acts occurred not at the riverbank, but during the trip or at a stop along the way, most likely inside the rented Chevrolet sale. This scenario became the primary working theory and guided the direction of the subsequent investigation. Authorities quickly identified a group of suspects involved in the disappearance of Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia. They were identified as Luis Fernando Vaca, Olger Zambrano, Andres Zambrano, and Omar Ardaños. All four were known to have been traveling the same route as the young women, that they were connected. Luis Fernando Vaca became a key figure. He was a friend. Denis suggested the trip to the beach, arranged the logistics, and drove the car that the young women were in. Investigators confirmed Vaca's connection to the other suspects through messages and the coordinated movement of both vehicles. Olger Zambrano rented a black Chevrolet Sail, which was a crucial detail, since without his involvement, the trip in that vehicle would have been impossible. He maintained contact with Vaca and coordinated the movement of the two cars. His role went beyond simply renting the car. He was apparently part of a larger plan. Andres Zambrano, Olger's brother, was driving separately from Vaca, but was accompanied by Omar Ardaños. Surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony confirmed that their vehicle was on the same route and stayed in close proximity to the car with the young women, a clear sign of coordinated action. Omar Ardaños, an associate of both Zambrano brothers, was in the second car, which moved in sync with the one carrying the young women during the critical time frame. What connected these men to the victims? All four were directly involved in communicating with the women and planning the trip. Luis Fernando Vaca was the central figure. He contacted Denis, relayed the invitation, proposed the route, and provided the transportation. The Zambrano brothers and Ardañez were his close associates and helped coordinate the logistics. This meant that all four men had access to the women and controlled the course of the trip. Based on this, investigators began to develop two working theories. One about the motive, and one about how the crime unfolded. Theory 1. An outburst of violence provoked by rejection. Attorney Paulina Rueda, Juliana's aunt, suggested that the incident could have been triggered by a confrontation after the women rejected unwanted advances. This theory points to coercion and aggression rather than a romantic relationship. It also explains the sudden escalation and brutality of the attack, given the nature of the injuries. Theory 2. A premeditated act. The victims' families pointed to several signs of planning: the presence of a second car for surveillance, the deviation from the tourist route, attempts to hide evidence, and, most notably, the size of the burial site. They believed that digging such a large hole spontaneously at night would have been difficult, which implies the burial site might have been prepared in advance. This theory also aligns with the staging of the abandoned and damaged rental car, which was later found in the city. A separate rumor about the use of acid was refuted by forensic experts, as no traces of chemicals were found. At that stage, the investigation did not officially favor either theory. Both were consistent with the established facts: the shared route, the suspects' connections, and their control over the transportation and timing. The most important thing was that each of the four men had both the opportunity and the means to commit the crime on his own. On May 29th, the Attorney General's office and the National Police of Ecuador arrested brothers Folger and Andres Zambrano near the border with Peru. Border guards reported that they were trying to flee the country. Arrest warrants had been issued based on surveillance camera footage, car rental records, and call logs. The suspects were taken to the nearest precinct for questioning and then taken into custody. Officials confirmed that the escape attempt occurred during the manhunt for the individuals involved in the murders of Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia. A few weeks later, disturbing news emerged. Authorities discovered the remains of Luis Fernando Vaca in the province of Chimborazo. A forensic analysis revealed the body had been dismembered, and the cause of death was violent trauma. Experts concluded that Vaca had died in April, shortly after the three women disappeared. This meant that a key figure, the driver of the car that night and a potential witness, had been killed before the police began making arrests. According to attorney Paulina Rueda, Vaca's parents had received threats and were forced to flee the country. Family believed that he was planning to testify about what happened on the night of April 4th and that his murder was an attempt to silence him before the truth could come out. The search for Omar Ardaños took considerably longer. He was in hiding, frequently changing his location and avoiding places he used to frequent. In November of 2023, he was finally apprehended. During questioning, it was revealed that he was connected to the Los Lobos criminal gang and had a prior conviction for illegal possession of a firearm. His connection to organized crime strengthened the theory that this was a coordinated act involving multiple people and a deliberate effort to conceal their tracks. Once the main group of suspects was identified and key evidence was collected, the legal classification of the case was revised. Prosecutors reclassified it from femicide to murder. The official reasoning was clear. There was no romantic or family relationship between the victims and the accused. Therefore, the legal definition of femicide did not apply. This change had serious implications, requiring a revision of the charges and a change in potential sentences. The families of Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia saw this as an attempt to downplay the severity of the crime. They made public statements, arguing that the brutality of the violence indicated a gender-based motive. Their arguments were supported by forensic findings, which documented signs of torture, restraint, and deep lacerations, as well as by the fact that the suspects had controlled the young women's movements. Attorney Paulina Rueda emphasized that the absence of a romantic relationship does not rule out gender-based violence, especially if the crime was committed because of the victim's gender. She argued that coercion, rejection, and subsequent aggression fall under the legal framework for gender-motivated murder. In her view, downgrading the charge weakened the protective power of the law and undermined efforts to protect women from systemic violence. The prosecution's decision caused a public outcry. Women's rights groups, human rights advocates, and local communities organized protests and launched online campaigns, calling to reinstate the original charges of femicide. They demanded full transparency in the presentation of evidence and argued that the gender-based aspect of the motive must be taken into account. Amid growing public pressure, both sides prepared additional reports and clarifications. However, the official charge remained the same: murder, which ultimately determined the structure of the trial and the framework for sentencing. The families vowed to continue fighting for recognition of the crime's gender-based nature and for a broader review of how similar cases are classified. On April 9, 2024, in the province of Esmeraldas, the first court hearing in the murder case was held. The defendants were Andres Zambrano and Omar Ardañez. The role of Holger Zambrano, who had rented the car, was being handled in a separate proceeding. The trial began with the reading of the official charges and a summary of the evidence admitted for consideration. Prosecutors presented reports from forensic and vehicle examinations, confirming the nature of the injuries and the manner of death. Additional materials included biological and trace evidence related to the rented Chevrolet sale, as well as surveillance camera footage. Employees from the rental company were called to testify, and witnesses identified one of the suspects with one of the victims. Before the group departed, the defense built its arguments on placing full responsibility for the crime on the deceased Luis Fernando Vaca. The attorneys argued that Vaca was in charge of the route and could have acted alone in committing the violent acts. They stated that the evidence presented failed to directly implicate the other defendants. Motions were filed to exclude some of the video recordings and to have the biological samples declared inadmissible due to possible contamination. The court denied these motions, citing the proper handling and preservation of all evidence. As for Holger Zambrano, the court found no evidence of his presence at the crime scene or direct participation in the violence. His role, according to the ruling, was limited to renting the car. As a result, Holger Zambrano was acquitted of these charges. On May 17, 2024, the court found Andres Zambrano and Omar Ardañez guilty of murder. Each of them was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison. The verdict was based on the combination of forensic reports, travel route data, testimony from the rental company, employees, and witnesses, which the court deemed sufficient to render a guilty verdict. Despite the verdict, the victims' families felt no relief. Legally, the case was closed, but emotionally and morally, many questions remained unanswered. What exactly led to the crime? Were other people involved? How much had been hidden? Attorney Paulina Rueda, who who represented the families and spoke on behalf of Juliana Macias, continued the fight for justice. She continued to gather new evidence, believing it could expand the list of suspects. She also spoke to the media, pointing out flaws in the investigation and insisting on the reclassification of the case as a gender-based crime. In June of 2024, Paulina reported being surveilled near her home. A month later, she began receiving threats. She reached out to the police by phone and text, but no protective measures were ever taken. In August, tragedy struck. Her son was murdered, although the authorities classified it as a domestic incident. The family believed it was connected to Paulina's work on the murder case of Denis, Juliana, and Nayeli. A few weeks later, Paulina herself disappeared. She suddenly stopped responding to messages and calls, and given her role as an attorney, a human rights defender, and the family's legal representative, along with the previous threats, the police launched a massive search. 2 days later, Paulina was found in the Tasagua district of Manabi province. She was taken to a medical facility in stable condition. She later returned home to Santo Domingo. The reasons for her kidnapping were never discovered, and several theories circulated, but none of them were ever officially confirmed. One thing was clear: she survived, but her disappearance was real, serious, and likely connected to her work on the triple homicide case. On April 7, 2025, 2 years after, the bodies were discovered by the Esmeraldas River. A private memorial service was held. On a stone placed there by volunteers, the names were carved: Denis Reyna, Juliana Macias, and Nayeli Tapia. Every year, women, activists, and journalists gather at this location. They light candles and tie white ribbons, not only to honor the memory of the 3 victims, but also to remind the world that the fight for the truth must go on until all the questions have been answered.